The Airbnb saga continues. I just want to be done with this. Like, I don't understand how someone can be such a person and have like zero care in the world that they just like screwed over an entire family.
Airbnb and short-term rentals continue to unravel the very fabric of what good, wholesome communities once were. American neighborhoods are now littered with illegally ran Airbnb operations. So not only are we going to talk about Airbnb's decay on society, we're also going to take a look at mortgage occupancy fraud and ask the question, how many of these Airbnb owners committed mortgage fraud to obtain their properties? And if you're an Airbnb owner, say for example with an FHA mortgage, you better be especially careful not to commit mortgage fraud, because remember, FHA loans are primary residences only, at least for the first year. And you should also know this, mortgage fraud has no statute of limitations, meaning you could be prosecuted 20 years later. So we're also going to ask the question, did all of these recent political people, Paxton, Cook, and Schiff, have they recently been accused of mortgage fraud that pertain to Airbnb properties? Now, here's the thing. If the law was actually enforced, the Airbnb markets would have already crashed on a nationwide scale. Now, lastly, we're going to give you guys an update on abolishing property taxes. And having said that, happy Labor Day and happy Monday. This video, as you know, Mitch, is going to be absolutely bonkers. Good morning. Thank you for joining me this early morning on Labor Day, Mitch. How are you today?
I was watching the futures market and gold hit an all-time high. It'll probably come back down for a couple of days because it's hitting what's called an upper line. So it's a trend line, but it's an upper line. Usually when that happens, it peels back a little bit, but then it's going to keep on moving. So it's going positive. Silver's obviously going positive.
Yeah.
Interesting times, but as the markets become more in distress, you will see precious metals starting to move, seriously move. And that's what's happening.
Yeah, silver, and you guys know that have been watching my channel. The first time I invested, I believe, in anything on the channel was silver at $29 an ounce. So obviously I've been investing just a little bit at a time in silver, and right now silver is just kicking butt at 41.43. This is the futures. Obviously the market is not open today, it's Labor Day, but also gold hit a new all-time high. It's a little bit down right now, but it hit $3,557. Now XRP is being absolutely gutted because I recently invested, and I just want to make this super clear. I barely invested any money in XRP. I just wanted to go through the motions. Now, having said that, we're going to go into whether or not Airbnb is really decaying society. So I'm going to go into a report, and I'm also going to show you guys the recent Airbnb trends. But as I'm doing that, we're also going to listen to some boots on the ground testimony of some people that have experience with Airbnb. And as we're watching these videos, I want you guys to ask yourselves, is Airbnb good for America?
See the worst fear of an Airbnb host? I do Airbnb for a living. Just showed up at the house today. The guest checked out. Check this out. Is to then find a blood trail coming away from it. Look at all this blood. It just keeps going. Hopefully there's not a...
This came out on Saturday, August 30th, titled, "We're Losing Our Community. Short-term rentals are ruining Three Rivers," resident says. A quick search on Airbnb turns up hundreds of listings from canvas tents, pitched-in backyards to 11-bedroom riverfront mansions. On summer afternoon, visitors line up for frozen yogurt and craft beer. Cars squeeze into makeshift roadside parking, and restaurants overflow. The town feels bustling, but nearly everyone visible will be gone in a matter of days. Residents say the explosion of short-term rentals has eroded neighborhood ties, driven up housing costs, and even led to more encounters with bears rooting through tourist trash. The issue boiled over last year when the Tulare County Board of Supervisors struck down a proposed ordinance that would have set stricter limits on short-term rentals. The rules would have capped occupancy, tightened trash restrictions, and required rental owners, many of whom live hours away in Los Angeles or the Bay Area, to post contact information. The trash is all over the place, and we don't know who to call because the owners are out of town. Now, for longtime locals, the changes are especially stark in the schools. Nancy Brunson, who has lived in Three Rivers for 3 decades, 30 years, remembers when about 250 children were enrolled in local elementary and middle school. Now she estimates the number is closer to 70. It changes the nature of class tremendously because the smaller the group of kids, the less diverse of any experience they have. She ties the decline to the lack of affordable housing for young families, many of whom are priced out by vacation rental demand. This goes into Kara Brown, who rents out her home to afford to live. So she's saying, no, we need Airbnb because the cost of living is so high. Now, this is also interesting. That doesn't mean hosts and critics don't share frustrations. One common grievance is where the money goes. In 2024, Three Rivers generated more than $1.3 million in short-term rental taxes. So they're just taxing the short-term rentals, and they got $1.3 million. But because the town is unincorporated, all of it flowed back into Tulare County. Locals say that leaves them without funding for basics like walking path and beautification projects. We're all upset about that, Brown admitted. The debate in Three Rivers echoes fights happening across California and South Lake Tahoe to Santa Barbara, where residents are also pushing for tougher rules on rentals, yet the stakes feel different here. Three Rivers is relatively isolated with no neighboring towns to absorb overflow housing needs. Many residents feel the fabric of the community itself is fraying, not just its housing stock.
Host tried to unalive me and my dad when we were on a skiing trip in Colorado. Here's the story. Okay, so my dad and I take a yearly skiing trip. We always go to Colorado and we go ski in Vail, and we always get an Airbnb because that's how we roll. I think just like with everybody else, there's always like this underlying fear in the back of your head, like what if something were to happen? I always feel the same way, like in an Uber too. Like, are you ever really sure who you're renting this home from? And is it actually secure, or can they just break in the middle of the night and do something crazy? So this specific Airbnb that we stayed at was like the basement of a home in Colorado. And we rented it from this really nice older woman who we met when we got there. So we got to the Airbnb, we met her, and she let us know that she would not be staying in the home while we were there for the weekend, but that she had a roommate and that he worked a lot and that he would come in late at night and go to sleep in his room upstairs, and that we would have the entire basement to ourselves and we wouldn't be bothered. So we go to sleep on the first night, we have no issues. We wake up the next day, we go skiing, and then we come back for the evening. I took the bed that was closest to the stairs, and my dad was in a room that was like on the other side of the basement, kind of like farther away from the door to the upstairs. Okay, so I go to sleep on the second night and I'm starting to kind of drift off. And then all of a sudden I hear this guy upstairs and he's talking to someone, and they're like yelling back and forth, and this conversation is getting pretty heated. I couldn't exactly hear what they were saying at first, but as they came into the room, I realized quickly that the room that he was staying in was right above the room that I was sleeping in. And I started to hear that the one guy was yelling at him that he was like such a screw up and that he could never do anything right. And they were cussing and all of these things. And then the guy that I assumed lived there started to respond and say that he knows and that he might as well just off himself. And they continued to go back and forth until I started to notice that the voices that I was listening to talk back and forth were actually the same voice, but the guy was just changing the way that his voice sounded and the inflection in his voice as he was talking to himself and then responding back to himself.
I'd be freaked out too. Now, a few things about the trends with Airbnb right now. Market evolution and trends. So they're saying rising demand in rural areas, probably just like Three Rivers that we just read. And by doing so, you're literally eroding the fabric of society. But yeah, there's rising demand apparently in rural areas. Sustainability focus, luxury properties surge, interesting, rise of management companies. Longer stays and unique accommodations. Interesting. Challenges in the Airbnb market. There's a market saturation, obviously, regulatory scrutiny for obvious reasons, higher interest rates, and some of them are adjustable, competition and traveler preferences. People aren't going to spend as much money, and competition is just increasing, and challenges with Airbnb experiences. And speaking of challenges with Airbnb experiences, here's one more.
You've got to be the stupidest moron if you think that I'm going to pay you that amount of money. Hello?
Hey, do you have a minute?
Who the is this?
It's Faye Esparza. I own the Airbnb you stayed at.
Okay. What do you want?
Did you have a party during your stay?
Do you even know what a party is? I just had a couple friends over.
So I have the Ring camera and there were actually like 30 people.
Look, you can call it whatever the you want. Just tell me why you were bothering me so we can get this over with.
So the Airbnb description, it clearly says that you can't have parties.
Yeah, it took like 2 seconds to read that thing. And the party was yesterday, so what the are you calling me for now?
Well, you have to pay for all the cleaning and repairs.
You're kidding, right?
No, I'm serious. You did at least $4,500 worth of damage, which is way over the standard cleaning cost. You're going to have to cover it.
You've got to be the stupidest moron if you think that I'm going to pay you that amount of money.
Look, the whole place is trashed because of what you guys did. You need to...
Listen. I don't have time for this bull, okay? Lose my number and off.
Mitch, I'm just going to ask you straight up, okay? Overall, is Airbnb bad for America? And why or why not?
No, Airbnb is not bad for America. It's bad for those who are participants in the Airbnb. It's bad from a standpoint of society because there are people who believe they're entitled, just like that idiot that you just saw swearing at that lady. That person belongs in jail. And I'm willing to bet you she didn't press criminal charges. I'm also willing to bet that when you do a video like that, she didn't even think that the video itself should have had his name in it. You make a person's life that does that, you literally make their life living hell. This is a societal problem. And people believe that who are supposed to be guests in these homes, that they're entitled. It's very similar to what you see in airports when people show up half dressed. This is a societal issue because society isn't pushing back. This is the problem of letting people get away with things when there's no ramifications. And the hotel world is much better established to deal with these problems much quicker. They don't generally occur in the hotel world. So the hotel operators, the big boys, know how to service a guest properly and make sure that that guest's safety is top priority. Therefore, they screen who is coming into the hotel. That's what they're supposed to be doing. Unfortunately, mom and pop homeowner who may and or may not have committed mortgage fraud by virtue of saying this house is a homestead don't have that ability. They don't think it through. Also, they don't think through the economics. How many people that own these Airbnbs have actually said, how much is it going to cost me? I'm going to put it in the pro forma if my property gets destroyed. How much in net revenue did the fact that that property got destroyed, A, in the cost, B, in the downtime, do I even have net profit afterwards? And I would suggest to you, no, you don't. And the other problem is that shows up by virtue of how many Airbnbs are on the market right now for sale in Houston, as an example. So these problems are all connected, but it's a societal issue. You must connect liability with privilege. It's a privilege to get on an airplane. It's a privilege to go to somebody's property as an Airbnb. And if there isn't liability, i.e. jail time and or dollars associated with it, then the pro forma de facto for the Airbnb world isn't real. People get online and they say, oh, this is great, this is great, this is great. Very few of them are great. Most of them are turning into economic disasters. And in theory, when all that stuff hits the market, that'll help bring down the market a little bit. It's not that many properties in total, but it is a problem.
Yeah, and there's some places that are saturated with Airbnbs, and certainly in those areas that are highly concentrated, especially on coastal towns, of Airbnb, if there is enforcement of existing law, some of those areas might be actually hit hard. Now, Mitch, I want to go into the mortgage fraud and the occupancy fraud aspect of the video now, and I want people to understand why someone might commit occupancy fraud to get a home. Now, first of all, understand that when you purchase a primary residence compared to purchasing an investment property, it's a lot cheaper, meaning the interest rate is lower and the fees are much lower when you're purchasing a primary residence. But not just that, sometimes the only way you can qualify to purchase a home is by getting it as a primary residence, so you don't have your rent or your current mortgage impact your debt to income ratio. So some people are acting like they're going to purchase a primary residence so that their debt to income ratio is low enough to even qualify. Whereas if they were honest and purchased an investment property, they simply wouldn't qualify for the home because of debt to income ratio. So I want to make another point on this. Okay, if you are an owner of an Airbnb and if you purchased a home on an FHA mortgage, understand and remember, FHA mortgages are only for primary residences. So if you purchased a home and 1 week later, after you close the transaction, you list that home on Airbnb or you list that home on MLS, that record is saved in the database and you have just committed mortgage fraud. So again, if you purchase a home as your primary residence and 1 week later you rent that out, you committed mortgage fraud, and those records are now recorded forever. And there is no statute of limitations. In other words, don't commit mortgage fraud, because your life will turn upside down. You can do jail time, you can go bankrupt. It's just not worth it. And I'm going to show you guys right now what mortgage fraud and occupancy fraud look like. When we look at the most common types of fraud, the most common types of mortgage fraud include income and asset falsification. There's also identity theft and occupancy fraud, which are frequently used by individuals to secure loans they wouldn't otherwise qualify for. Okay, number 36, occupancy misrepresentation is falsely claiming investment properties as primary residences, and that has tripled. Okay, occupancy fraud has tripled since 2020. As the mortgage industry adopts to changing market condition, fraud risks continue to evolve in both scale and sophistication. From occupancy misrepresentation to identity theft and falsified financials, fraud poses growing challenges for lenders, borrowers, and regulators alike. And I'm going to show you guys, okay, what you're looking at here is an application. This is a mortgage application, okay? And the first thing you're looking at is section 3, which is your real estate owned section. So if you own real estate, you are supposed to report that right here. And it asks the status right here that I'm circling and the intended occupancy, okay? So it's on your mortgage application. So if you have more than one property, and we're going to go into the politicians that have multiple properties here in a second, but this is the section that you disclose the truth on, section 3. Now, after that, on section 4, this is where you tell them the type of loan that you want, and you see that arrow that says occupancy. So you check off whether it's your primary residence, a second home, or an investment property. Section 5A is one more opportunity for people to confirm what they're doing with their property. So if you lied on those first two sections, there's an additional safeguard in place to where if you want to commit mortgage fraud, you got a second chance to commit mortgage fraud right here under 5A, which asks, will you occupy this property as your primary residence? Yes or no. So they ask you 2 times. Okay, so you have 2 opportunities to either tell the truth or to commit mortgage fraud. But then under that, it asks about other properties. So a second question about other properties. You see what I'm saying here? They do double due diligence to make sure you're not committing mortgage fraud and occupancy fraud. So if you do commit it, understand it's in these loan documents and you signed your name to it. And if it's FHA, it's a federal document. The next question is, have you had an ownership interest in another property in the last 3 years? So it's asking if you own other property and what you're doing with that other property, is your second home, primary residence, or investment property, and things of that nature. So it's all right here. There have been many public officials that have been accused of occupancy fraud and mortgage fraud. Trump's effort to weaponize mortgage fraud claims could ensnare his allies. But here's the thing. Think about this statement, okay? Weaponized mortgage fraud. It's the mortgage fraud itself that has been weaponized. It's whoever committed the crime that is weaponizing that crime to profit. They profit, they hurt society, and they profit off of that fraud. So what is CNN talking about? If a law is violated, a law is violated, and that's it. Now I'm going to read a little bit of this. In 2 instances now, the Trump administration has used this allegation to investigate a prominent Democrat who once probed Trump, the New York Attorney General, Letitia James, and California Senator Adam Schiff. I forgot about them too, to be honest with you. In a 3rd instant, Trump is wielding this claim as his justification to fire Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook. Okay, so first of all, if you're in law and you're in a law enforcement or you're creating a law, in my opinion, you should be treated more harshly, not more lenient, more harshly. Okay, let me keep reading here. But there are also examples of several prominent Republicans facing similar questions, which underscores how selective and self-serving Trump's attacks on his foes appear. If the president and his administration press forward, it could turn into a slippery slope. What do they mean press forward? You mean press forward with enforcing the law? We can't even get people to enforce the law, Mitch. We have the laws in place. On Thursday, for example, Republican Senator John Cornyn of Texas, who faces a tough 2026 primary challenge from State Attorney General Ken Paxton, posted on X a July headline noting Paxton had claimed 3 separate homes as his primary residence on mortgage applications. Well, if he listed those homes immediately after he closed to rent for Airbnb or a long-term rental, well, guess what? You just committed mortgage fraud, and that record is there sealed forever. Think about it. Potential mortgage fraud of this type we're talking about here, occupancy fraud, appears remarkably common. And the reason it's appearing common, you guys, is again because they're not enforcing the law. If they were enforcing the law, it would not be common. It would be very uncommon. Basically, the idea is that you misrepresent your intent in using the property, such as claiming it to be a primary residence to secure lower interest rates. Mitch, I have a question for you. Of those people, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, and they committed occupancy fraud, right? Do you think, first of all, that they're doing the occupancy fraud and using the occupancy fraud to invest in real estate, like long-term or short-term rentals? And second question, do you think that if the law was enforced, because we already have multiple laws on Airbnb, but do you think if that law was enforced, Airbnb would have already crashed, that market would have already crashed, and investors wouldn't keep purchasing properties to convert to Airbnb?
More than likely, Airbnb wouldn't exist if that law was enforced. So it's hard to figure out what the percentage of people that have done this mortgage fraud, but this has been promoted for years. Well, this is how you do it. And all these people on YouTube that made those promotions are culpable in aiding and abetting a criminal action. So the chain is deep. First thing, and then second thing is, with regard to CNN, that's Criminal News Network. And they are the leader in the downfall of society because they promote breaking the law. When you look at whoever it is, regardless of what party it is, it's not even relevant to anything. Do you realize that it's 5 years in jail at a state level, and I believe it's $100,000 minimum for mortgage fraud? If you are deemed on a federal level, which is possible, it's $1 million and 30 years in prison. This is serious. So all these people that taught it and said, this is how you do it, well, you're aiding and abetting. Those people who did it, you're guilty. And you've got a big problem because the prosecutions will start coming based on these actions, regardless of who you are. And to your question, Travis, how many people did it knowingly? Well, they all did it knowingly because it takes effort to look at the paragraphs and say, yeah, I'm going to ignore it. It's in the mortgage application. There's no defense. Whose signature is on the bottom of that page? They're caught. When you get prosecuted, you have the right to remain silent. You might want to use it because you can't win. the prosecutors will beat you into a pulp, rightfully so. So best you cut a deal and get out of this mess. And by the way, you get dinged with mortgage fraud, good luck getting another mortgage in the future. You're going to have all sorts of problems.
Yeah.
Again, they're supposed to, this should never have happened, right? People are doing things because they've been taught, well, I can get away with it. That's what I said before. There has to be a liability associated with the privilege. Having a house is a privilege. It's not a right. Having an investment is a privilege. It's not a right. If you commit fraud, you've got a problem. People who promote it and say, oh, it's okay, and we're going to do political favors for our friends, yeah, you're aiding and abetting.
Being a loan officer pre-global financial collapse and post-global financial collapse, I could tell you that the loan underwriting process, other than the automated underwriting 56.99% debt to income ratio on the back end for FHA, which is horrible, they've tightened up income verification like crazy. You can't do stated income. I would say the biggest difference from the GFC to right now is the way that you prove someone's income. But I always noted that one of the weakest links on a loan application is your real estate owned. It's very difficult to prove what someone intends to do with their property, especially if they're not enforcing the law and people are just committing fraud without any consequence. So that's actually one of the weakest parts of the loan application when it comes to occupancy. So no wonder why they're taking advantage of it. Now, I wanted to move on to our fight to abolish property taxes because a lot of milestones were made last week. And I actually woke up early this morning about 3 a.m. and I was like, dang, Ken Paxton he must be throwing up right now. And everyone associated with the ISD bond fraud, I literally woke up at 3 a.m. like, wow, this is a very big deal. Like it finally hit me, Mitch, like, dang, something's going to happen, right? And I wanted to remind the viewers real quick of where we're at. August 26th of 2025, Mitch made an amazingly pinpoint accurate, devastating Freedom of Information Act request. He sent this into Attorney General Ken Paxton, as well as to the Office of the Texas Auditor. This was an 18-page document. It's just absolutely amazing. So I wanted to let you guys know that they are in receipt of this documentation. The Attorney General has confirmed receipt of this document as of August 29th at 9:56 a.m. Now, we're really also showing you guys this because there's a 10-day response limitation. They have 10 days to respond to give us an accurate update on when they're going to get this documentation together, or they have to say that we need more time. Now, also, the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, also received the Freedom of Information Act on the same day, which was August 29th of 2025. Here's the request number right here. Again, this is the Freedom of Information Act. Can you tell the viewers where we stand on the Freedom of Information Act request, and where do we stand on abolishing property taxes here in the great state of Texas?
What we have done is we sent out to all those people that you saw listed. Most of them were copied, but it was to the Texas Attorney General and a separate document to the Texas State Auditor. Now, the SEC, the FBI, they've all been copied. We are fully prepared for whatever response the Attorney General comes up with. And there are a multitude of responses they can come up with, including we need more time, the request is too broad. They'll come up with all sorts of nonsense. The point of the matter is we believe that the Texas State Auditor and the Attorney General, that their offices, which they lead, did not do their job. And the protections by virtue of the fraud that has taken place at the central appraisal districts and through the school districts with regard to the bond fraud is absolutely irrefutable. If you go to my website, mockingbirdproperties.com/DCAD, you will see a mountain of evidence. Much of it is their testimony that we have on audio. Much of it is their testimony that we have on video and audio. Much of it is their writings. Well, the courts, nobody has ever said that there's anything wrong with the evidence. In fact, it's deemed admitted. So let's get that issue out of the way right now. The evidence is the evidence. There's no defense. The ultimate problem here for mom and pop, all property owners, is the simple fact that the money doesn't exist to pay this fraud off. The bond fraud is that large. We've been able to quantify that it's roughly 5.1 trillion, but I will state emphatically that that is an extraordinarily conservative number because we can't track all the QSIPs. The only entity that I know of on this planet that can do that is the SEC by virtue of subpoena power. We can't track the off-balance sheet financing. We can't track the 313 agreement financing. We can't track the energy contract financing. These are all mechanisms that are dealt with under the hood that just simply, we don't have the ability to trace. So we utilized a denominator to come up with that 5.1 trillion. In the state of Texas, it's roughly 606 billion. And all that's outlined in these documents. So what we're saying is, what did you do, Attorney General, with regard to determining the probability of default on any of these issues with regard to these bonds? Where's the evidence that you had any communications with the bond underwriters themselves to determine what is going to be proven as no probability of default? You just went and did it and you got away with it until you no longer got away with it. So what we're doing is the two entities saying, turn over your documents. Doesn't really matter what they answer. The evidence is the evidence. The point being that we've asked, and that's why the SEC has now been copied. I believe we're going to force the state of Texas to have a conversation with the federal government that says, we've got a big problem here, massive problem. When you realize that the state of Texas has committed bond fraud, who's going to want to loan the state of Texas? Who's going to want to loan the bond guarantee program? What is it really worth given the size of the outstanding bonds? When you look at it from a federal level, the federal government's putting in 165 billion and hasn't got a clue why. The only entity on the planet that can truly get in under the hood to determine the massive amount of money. Now, I will tell you that the attorneys in Washington have looked at this. They think the spider web is as big as 17 trillion. Could be. Bottom line is SEC's got the ability to figure it out and we don't. We don't have subpoena power. So we're pushing these two entities towards one another. And I'm telling everybody, including the government right here and now, what we're doing. No, it's not a secret. It's in the documents. You can read it. The point of the matter is they've done it. They got away with it until they don't get away with it. And when they don't get away with it is when the banks lock up and say, yeah, we're not funding any of this and we're not touching this and we don't understand what your bond underwriters have done. Now, are the banks guilty in participating in this? Could be. But again, that's a job for the SEC. What we've done with the bill is, which Helen Kerwin asked me to write, is we put a floor underneath all property investors by saying repeal all property tax in favor of the uniform states sales tax. That's what we can do for mom and pop. The SEC, from the standpoint of income taxes and from the standpoint of finding out about the bond fraud and protecting the damage that the state of Texas has done by ignoring the law, the SEC can then get involved and say, with the federal government, this is how we're going to put a floor underneath the amount of damages that could occur if we don't get involved.
Right. And that way, a lot of the mom and pops that have their pensions and 401ks wrapped up in the ISD debt, even small businesses, they're not going to be hurt as bad. They're going to be hurt bad, but not as bad. And I just wanted to reiterate the amount of effort and the extent of what we've done, especially what you've done, Mitch, just to get these people to enforce the law. Absolutely shocking. And I wanted to just reiterate as well that one of the solutions, there's a few, but one of the solutions is, remember, you guys, the People's Bill is in, and Mitch made this bill, to abolish or repeal, the legal term repeal, property taxes. That's currently in Texas Ledge. After it's out of Texas Ledge, that bill will be assigned a number and we can talk about it more. Now, the scary thing about Texas Ledge is a lot of times, perhaps they're younger attorneys and perhaps they don't know math, giving them benefit of the doubt here, they butcher the bill. So our first step here is essentially combating Texas Ledge, making sure if they do change the bill that they keep the math in place, because there's no need for all this polarizing, crazy nonsense that's all over the house right now in Texas. Just use the math. So as long as the math stays the same and the mechanisms for transparency and accountability stay the same, do whatever you need to do, but get the bill out of there, because when it's out and when we need to start doing mass protest in Austin, that's exactly what we're going to do. Now, other than that, guys, do me a favor, comment below. How many Airbnb owners do you think committed occupancy fraud just to get the home that they currently have listed on Airbnb? I'm interested to hear from you. Let us know what you guys learned on this video and whether or not you agree with some of our opinions. If you want to join our fight in abolishing property taxes, you can either go to the Facebook page, which is linked below, or you can go to Mitch's website, mockingbirdproperties.com/DCAT. Mitch, it's always an honor. Happy Labor Day and happy Monday. And if you guys are out there enjoying your lives, investing in real estate, just trying to learn what's going on in society, you guys already know we wish you luck and we hope you win.